All right, welcome again to Social Distillation, the submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the bead and pour white lightning straight onto your brain. What are we talking about today, Samuel?
Well, that you can't hate your government any more than we do. The medical industry, the government, everything. We're going to finally hit Fauci. You wanted to start with, I guess, Ukraine first, but
Hmm.
uh, then we're going to talk a little bit about the Vance speech, and then that leads right into Fauci. And I've got a good example here of why your doctors suck. So even got a prop right there.
Yeah, well, and the you can't hate your government anymore. The problem is because they've become so intertwined. And I don't remember who I first heard um, point this out. It may have been Kevin Williamson, whose book you've got back there. One of his books you've got back there on your bookshelf somewhere is think about all the things for Americans and maybe Westerners in general. I don't know about, Europe, Russia, the rest of the world, but think about the things you hate the most that frustrate you the most. And they are some of, if not the most heavily regulated industries
Mhm.
that we have, right? Um, Flying sucks. It's annoying, very heavily regulated. Um, for a very long time, uh, phone and TV services were really annoying, and you had very limited choice because they were very heavily regulated by the FEC. Banking, very heavily regulated. So the average citizen hates those things and they're very annoying. And yet, the people in charge of those things make ludicrous amounts of money
Mhm.
precisely because they're so heavily regulated and it limits their competition.
Well, and as we're seeing with Doge, which I'll address Isomorphic's comment after this quick little comment, is what we're seeing now is how much of it you couldn't see, and
Mm-hmm.
the average person doesn't see. And I'll give you an example from my former work life. In When I was in Oklahoma, I worked for a company called Stillwater Typewriter. I don't know if they're there anymore or not, but they had transitioned to copy machines at the time because obviously typewriters are not a big deal right now. But one of the guys I worked with was a tech. I was the delivery guy. Okay. He was talking about working in New York for that same job. If he went out to a job and he had to move the copy machine away from the wall,
Mm-hmm.
he would have to call me to come move it for him.
Oh
And
my
then he would
gosh.
work on it. And then I would have to come back and move it back because otherwise the unions would get mad at each other because he was taking my job away by moving the copy machine so he could do his work.
Mm-hmm.
And there was something that everybody else in the office would not have been privy to, just the two people that were affected by it. And so we're seeing that with government. The only people who are privy to it are the people who are benefiting from it and the people who it affects, which is only the people that work there because they're pushing pencils back and forth at each other.
Mm-hmm. Well, I wanted to start very briefly,
Mhm.
just because it's in the news, and I don't think we can ignore it. Plus, our unofficial third co-host is Russian, and the what's going on in Ukraine is in the news. It's all over X because of Trump's call to Putin and trying to work out a peace deal there, and the pro-Ukraine people losing their minds. Um, I mean, there's a lot I could talk about the facts and the right and the wrong and the uh, you know, historical examples, blah 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 blah. But I want to keep it simple and keep it real because I've said before, and one of the comments I've been making on X to these people is, look, even before he really started to gain momentum in the election or in the campaign, um, partly because of the assassination attempt and how much that woke people up and shifted people of, oh crap, things are really real here.
And how great
Um,
a photo op he got out of it.
Create a photo off, but then also um, weaponizing that, if you will, weaponizing that photo op, that moment by going on these long form podcasts and letting people get to know who he really is. Hey, this guy you saw come millimeters away from death, he's a real human being and he's someone you can actually relate to, aside from all the pomposity and some of the more outrageous statements that make you go, oh dude, what? Listen to him in long form, and that's why he stayed away mostly from the corporate media. But the real inflection point, the beginning of the beginning, I think, was that town hall with, was it CNN or NBC? I don't remember
Mm-hmm.
who. It was a
It was
pretty
CNN, Caitlin
it was
Collins.
yeah, it was a pretty hostile corporate media shill, and was trying to pressure him on the war in Ukraine. And he very, in a very real moment, I just want people to stop dying.
He had that. She kept badgering him on a
Hmm.
question, and he
Hmm.
just had that frustrated, resigned to. I'm not going to yell at you, but I want to.
Yeah.
I mean, he just kind of. I just want people to stop dying.
And
And she shut up. She was like,
how do you argue with that?
mm-hmm,
Okay. You can look, it's a messy situation. I've said before, I feel genuine sympathy for the people of Ukraine now because of the horrors of the war that they've had to endure for a couple of years now. And you go back even before, of all these people losing their minds because Trump is trying to get a peace deal. And I don't remember any of you losing your minds in 2014 when Putin just occupied Crimea and said, "This is mine now." And Obama did nothing about it, right? I don't remember any of you losing your minds. So please shut up,
mm-hmm.
first of all. Secondly, um, as Musk said, and he was kind of paraphrasing things that people in the past have said before, which is that this wars in general, especially in the modern era, are, look at World War One. World War One was a penis measuring contest by all the inbred aristocrats of Europe.
Mm.
This war is being waged by and for rich people who know each other, but being fought by young people who don't. But I had a thought the other day when I couldn't sleep, and so I was isomorphic. Do you play the game Helldivers? Just out of curiosity. It's a fun game. It's cheeky and tongue in cheek with its humor. And it's a fun first person shooter if you like those. And I ask because when I'm up late or up early and playing, at least one of the people in my squad has got a Cyrillic name. So I don't know how popular it is over there. And that made me realize actually Musk was kind of wrong there, because with our interconnected world, there's a good chance if I was in the Ukraine Foreign Legion, there's a good chance I could be shooting at someone that I was shooting with virtually
Mm-hmm.
in a game, that I was having fun with not that long ago, and now I'm shooting at him and he's shooting at me. The was it the was it Kipling who wrote the poem about, you know, but now ranged as infantry, I shot at him and he at me. And the point of the poem is, outside of this, we could be sharing a pint at a tavern and be friends.
Well, we have historical evidence of this with the Christmas ceasefire
Mm-hmm.
in World War II.
And, and so to make it real, I've referenced this before, but I can't remember what YouTube channel it was. But somebody made a video about the sinking of the flagship of the Russian fleet in the Black Sea, and all of the pro Ukraine people were rah rah rah, get them. And this guy said, "Okay, yeah, I'm pro Ukraine. I'm on Ukraine's side here, but." And then he shared a letter from one of the sailors who died. He shared a letter that this 19-year-old kid had written home and said, let's not get too rah rah here. A human beings, hundreds of human beings are dead because of this. And so I wanted to ask our unofficial Russian co-host, Isomorphic, do you know firsthand, as in a friend or a family member, anyone who has been killed or injured in this, well, not war, I don't want to get you in trouble, the special military operation in Ukraine? Do you know anyone firsthand, or do you know anyone secondhand, someone that a friend or a family member knows who was killed or injured?
Now,
Because
I will say, don't get yourself in trouble because I know there's
mhm,
different laws on what you can post on
mhm,
our wall,
mhm,
even though it's our wall.
mhm.
You still have to go through your filters of your country, so don't get yourself in trouble, obviously. But
But this has been going on for 2 years now, and the casualty counts are kind of fuzzy. because there's a lot of propaganda and disinformation on both sides. But I mean, 2 years of what has devolved into essentially World War I. It's not pretty, and the casualty counts can't be good. There's a great song by one of my favorite bands, Wasp, that was inspired by
Aren't we
a
on
black.
3 years now
What?
of
Oh
this
yeah,
war?
we're closing in on 3 years now.
Didn't it
Yeah,
start in February?
yeah, I think you're right. Yeah,
Yeah.
so 3 years now. Um, Blackie Lawless was inspired to write the song "Heavens Hung in Black" uh, when he was seeing the casualties coming out of Iraq in the surge primarily. And the title comes from a quote by Lincoln. I believe it was after Antietam, may have been Shiloh, where he got the casualty figures, and he remarked, "Heaven must be hung in black." So for all of you using this as a political cudgel, it's not going to be pretty. It's going to be messy. It's not going to be perfect, but it's been attributed to Churchill. Who knows? Because it's the internet. But uh, the worst peace is better than the most just war, because I just want people to stop dying.
Mm.
And this segues us into the speech that JD Vance just recently gave at the Munich Security Conference, because what is the number one issue for Europe when it comes to security right now is Russia. And part of his point that he didn't make explicitly, but he was implying, which is the point that a lot of us on the "why are we giving all this money to Ukraine" people are we sure we're on the right side? And not that Putin is the right side, because go find, you don't even need to read the book, but go look up the book Death of a Dissident.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And just see what that book is about.
Let me rephrase that, and there might be a better way of looking at it. Are we sure there is a right side?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Are we sure there is a right side? Are there any good guys, or are there just victims? There are a lot of victims, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any good guys here, though? Individually, on the ground, sure, there probably are. But when it comes to the people pulling the levers of power, I'm not so sure. And not just Ukraine versus Russia, but now you bring in the EU versus Russia, and you look at what Vance was talking about and how the EU is becoming increasingly authoritarian, and you wonder, why are we propping these people up with our taxpayer dollars?
Mm-hmm.
And the text I sent to you when I finally got around to watching it in full was, I don't know how he's standing upright with those giant steel balls weighing him down, because that is not the kind of diplomatic speak you usually give in person, in public, to your ostensible allies.
Mm-hmm.
But he called them out with specifics.
It's like an intervention.
Yes.
Yeah, coming together, dude. You've been drinking way too much, and here's the effect it has on your life.
Do you even remember what you did last night? Here,
Yeah.
because I have pictures.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Not only that and this is what you did to everybody else. This is how you ruined everybody's night last night.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So
yeah. That's an even better point. You're not just ruining your life. It's the drinking, drugs, whatever gets out of control. We talked about this of a bad habit versus an addiction. When it starts to affect other people, when it starts to negatively affect the people around you, that's when you definitely have a problem you need to address.
Yep. And we're still friends, but I can't be encouraging that anymore.
Yeah. It's not like we're suddenly gonna, be antagonistic towards the EU, but
well,
guys,
I'll take it
we
a step
can't be
forward.
a part of this.
It's because we're friends I'm telling you this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because we're friends, because we've been allies for a very long time, especially with Britain.
Or family. I mean, we can think of Europe as family.
Yeah.
They're like our uncles, right? Mm.
So much of Americans trace their roots to Europeans. Um, always have since our inception. It was not a lot of British, but then also a lot of Germans, and then later waves were a lot of Eastern Europeans and Italians as well. So our roots go back a long way. And then when you talk diplomatically, this was Churchill who coined the term the special relationship that's starting with World War II. The U.S. British, and not just British, but the Anglosphere, as Churchill called it, the British Commonwealth, there was a very special alliance there because of those roots, because of those shared values. And that's why Vance, even in his speech, singled them out as we have this special relationship, and you're undermining that, bro.
Mm-hmm.
With one of the things he specifically mentioned, and you can find these letters, people have been posting them online. You know, this isn't just a rumor of letters being sent to people from the Scottish government saying that if you are praying in your own home and your own home is within this bubble around an abortion clinic, you could be in violation of the law. I'm sorry, what? No.
Well,
Uh,
there was one step he could have taken further. He could have singled out the UK and been like, when your minister said you're going to start arresting US citizens, you kind of picked a fight there
mm-hmm,
because you try to extradite one US citizen and there's a lot of shit that's going to happen.
mm-hmm. Or the worst thing would be you arrest a US citizen who has traveled to England, and now you've got cops waiting for him at the airport going, you posted this, so you're under arrest for violation of this law.
Mm-hmm.
You know, exactly what France did to the Telegram CEO, invited him over under false pretenses and then arrested him.
Mm-hmm.
That ain't cool, yo.
I mean, who's to say we're here in the public space worldwide, even though only a couple Americans and one Russian listen to us. But I mean, Germany is one of the countries in question here, and
Yes.
I have a spouse that's German, and we still go see her family there. Could I walk off a plane one day and the facial recognition goes off because AI, even though we're a small channel, will still have my face?
Based on that 60 Minutes interview with those Russian ministers or those German ministers, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, that could
Because I,
absolutely happen.
because I insulted them.
Yeah. Yeah. So for anyone who doesn't know, uh 60 Minutes, an American CBS news program, long-running news program, sat down with, and this was not a combative interview.
Mm-mm.
CBS was clearly on the side of the censors.
They were
And
actually in awe of how great
yeah,
it was.
oh, isn't this awesome? And what this minister said, I'm paraphrasing, is that the reason they do this is because an online offense is worse than in person. Because if I insult you in person, then you can respond and then we part and it ends there. Well, okay, that's a false premise, but whatever. But if it's online, then it's forever. Okay, well, by that logic, you can arrest anyone who's ever written an op-ed.
Mm-hmm.
So that is not a slippery slope. That we've hit the bottom of the slope. Uh, and where this segues into the main topic for today that we wanted to talk about, which was Fauci, specifically, but then the COVID narrative in general, is one of the things Vance brought up in his speech was the collusion between governments and social media to censor things during the pandemic
That were
that
true.
we are now admitting we all knew it was true to begin with. I mean, go look up Jon Stewart making what's his bucket feel very uncomfortable by saying it's in the name. The
I
Wuhan
think it's
Institute of
Colbert,
Virology.
right?
It was Colbert. Yeah, I
Yeah.
couldn't remember which idiot it was. And you know, The audience is,
Jon Stewart was right. No, it wasn't
yeah,
Colbert. That was Jon Stewart. Jon Stewart was talking to Colbert.
exactly. And Colbert was obviously very uncomfortable and trying to shut it down. And Jon Stewart just
You
kept
mean the
going,
guy
and the
who did the
audience was
vaccine
laughing.
dance was
Exactly.
uncomfortable in that moment?
But at the time Jon Stewart was saying that, as much as I dislike him for a lot of things, that was pretty brave of him because that was still cancelable. That was
Mhm.
still, your social media accounts have been suspended and blocked because of saying that. And now governments are admitting, oh yeah, the lab leak thing. Yeah, that's where it came from.
Yeah, Jon Stewart was part of that little small coalition of lefty personalities that were saying stuff that were cancelable, but they were, maybe if it was just one, they still would have been, but because there was a few of them,
I
and
think
the
Maurer was one of them. Bill Maurer.
yeah, Bill Maher was the first example that popped in my head. Bill Burr, the,
Mm,
all of these who said some stupid stuff recently, but at the same time, he was just speaking his mind. So I think he actually believes the stupid stuff he said recently because he didn't filter himself before. Why would he filter himself now? But yeah, there was that small coalition of semi comedian, semi talk show host people that weren't with the mothership. They were like, "Hey, this is what liberals used to be." They were the JFK fans, or not
hmm
JFK,
hmm
RFK fans. They were the people who wanted a Bill Clinton type Democrat, not a Biden or an AOC or any of those type of Democrats. Well, they
Yeah.
even believed Biden was that until he was in office, and then they're like, "What the hell?"
hmm hmm Yeah. And so the hopefully result of people being feeling more free and literally being more free thanks primarily to X, but now as we mentioned, even Facebook, Meta has said we're going to start scaling these fact checking back. We're going to start letting the platform be more open. And I think that is probably because I mentioned this to you when I was down there for the Super Bowl. It's so X Twitter was very important because of who was on it. The media personalities, the politicians, and the very important people who create these narratives. But it wasn't important as far as reach, at least in the US, until Musk took over. So before Musk took over, only about 10% of Americans had a Twitter account. Now about 20%. So it has doubled under Musk. But the reason what Zuckerberg said was so important is that something like 80 to 90% of Americans have a Facebook account. Whether or
Mm-hmm.
not they post on it or regularly or not is it not the point, but that's why that was so important, because that has a lot of reach for the normies, if you will. Um, and one of those things is people more openly criticizing what happened during the pandemic, and more importantly, the response to it, so that we don't have that happen again. And the big way you make
Well,
that not happen again
there,
is people need to be held accountable.
there's also something that's more than just the reach on Facebook versus X. If you're on X, you're following people you follow, like your
Mm-hmm.
YouTube guy you follow, the the movie review person you follow, the bands you follow, all of these public personas, plus
That's a good
some
point.
people you know. Facebook is mostly people you know.
Mm-hmm.
So you're getting information about what people you know probably respect actually think directly from their posts. Whereas X, I mean, if some musician you follow makes a stupid comment, you just keep scrolling.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Whereas some person in your family makes a comment, you're more likely to get engaged to it, whether it's positive or negative. You're either gonna be like, "Oh, you're being stupid, Uncle blah blah blah," or you're going to at least have an effect to where, oh, I better not talk politics with them at Thanksgiving because it's going to get ugly. Those kind of
Hmm.
things, because it affects personal relationships. So more people are on it, and it gets personal. Where X is so Twix is so impersonal, even with the people because it's just words. You're just scrolling through. It's not as engaging. So
All right. Well, speaking of being held accountable, you wanted to talk specifically about what is the number now? 17 state attorney generals who have opened
oh, did I?
state investigations into Fauci. Um, and Fauci specifically, but clearly there are lots of people that need to be held accountable. But the reason this matters is because of the preemptive pardon that Biden gave Fauci on his way out the door.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember, what was Birx and Collins, were they included as well, or was it just Fauci?
I did not have a chance to look up Birx
Okay.
because I have something from her.
Hmm.
Oh,
But though Fauci as the head of all of this, both bureaucratically, but then also PR wise, because he was so frequently out there in on the news media making public pronouncements. He is important. I just hope it doesn't stop there. I hope that's the start of going after the head of the snake, if you will, and then using that to go out and say, okay, who else needs to be held criminally liable or civilly liable of, hey, you ruined my life.
mm-hmm.
I demand civil compensation for that. I am hoping that even where because I don't this I don't know, um but the the pardon, quote unquote, I'll get to that later, that's my bit on this, only covers federal crimes. So not only can the state attorney general say, well, did you violate state laws that we can prosecute you for, but then through the process of investigating that, my hope is that there are civil complaints that are filed to hold these people, not the agencies, because then you're just holding me responsible. You're just taking money out of my pocket
Yeah.
but no. These individuals personally responsible. And when you look at how much money, not just the salary he was paid for his official position, but how much money Fauci has made through deals with pharmaceutical companies, through shared patents with pharmaceutical companies. No. That is those are ill-gotten gains that the people you have harmed have a have a piece of that should be coming to them. So my hope is that all of these people get bogged down with civil suits for the lives that they ruined. Um, anyway, so
And it was 17. I looked it up while you were doing that.
okay, so where did you want to start with this?
Uh, well, let's show the Birx video.
Okay.
Okay, so this is Dr. Deborah Birx, who was one of the top advisors
Hmm.
during the pandemic under Trump. She was part of his administration along with
Did,
Fauci.
what was her official position? I can't remember. Was was she FDA or CDC?
She
I
was
can't
not,
remember which.
no, she was part of his uh
I knew she was brought in as part of this committee
mhm.
that Vice President
Yeah,
Pence oversaw,
I think it's under HHS, but
but I couldn't remember.
uh,
But she was an actual
and she
health
was,
bureaucrat of some sort.
yeah, but she was not only was there, but she was probably one of the top three voices there because there was
Mhm.
Francis Collins and there was Fauci and then there was Birx. Those were the top three voices in Trump's ear. And she famously, in her own book that she wrote,
Mhm.
said she laid out how she convinced Trump to do the lockdowns. And not only how she convinced him to do the lockdowns, of how she intended it for it to be a long time, the whole time, not just 2 weeks to what flatten the curve.
Flatten the curve.
So
Yep.
yeah, she bragged about beating Trump at his own game, which is the deal. And she said she was bragging about how if I let in with 2 weeks, then we have time to collect some data that says we can do more, that says we can do more, that says we can do more. And we're convincing the country to keep their kids out of school, which I'm serious. Down the road, there are going to be colleges that are recruiting kids that were young, that were in states that went back to school early.
From
Because
2005 to 2014, this is according to her Wikipedia entry, she was the director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention's Division of Global HIV/AIDS. And then she served in similar capacities after that.
yeah,
So she wasn't the director of the CDC, but a director of a part of the CDC.
okay, so I put Orwell up behind me on purpose because she was also one of the biggest voices on not only lockdowns and their necessity, but on putting the vaccine out there and everybody should get it and herd immunity and all of these things. Now what is it, double speak? Now we've gotten to the stage of double speak. Here is her, share with sound, on Piers Morgan the other day.
And what we've done wrong in public health is we didn't explain that COVID vaccines were nothing like the childhood vaccines, and that the childhood vaccines, like many of the diseases, you get it once, you don't get it again. And this is getting the children to have that disease without getting the deadly consequences. That is not what the COVID vaccine was designed to do. It wasn't perfect. And what we've done wrong in consequences.
That is not what the COVID vaccine was designed to do. Her words, YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
That is not what it was designed to do. Then she goes on to talk about how that's what's created distrust in childhood vaccines and all of this other stuff. So that's the person saying that the government did this wrong, but she was government. She was the one saying it.
Mm-hmm.
And playing to an ego. She did beat Trump at his own game. The art of the deal. She played the deal itself, but also played his ego because you're going to be the guy with warp speed. Never mind that we're going to give the guy that comes in after you all the credit, which we're going to use that same product to get the other guy in by delaying it a couple weeks till after the election.
Mm-hmm.
And
never mind that when it was first announced that they had a successful vaccine, the number that was being thrown out there was 90% effective. Effective at what? Preventing infection and transmission. This is
which they later
again,
came back and they said we never even studied that.
Yeah. Okay, but you were out there saying it. I've referenced this before, but the CDC director, I should have remembered that it wasn't Birx because I remember in August,
Yeah,
the
who was before
CDC director, Walensky.
Yeah, Walensky. Yeah.
In August of 21, the CDC director on CNN said the vaccine doesn't stop transmission. I'm paraphrasing. Doesn't stop transmission. It protects you from a severe case. It protects against death and hospitalization. That's what it does. The CDC director admitted this in August, and just a couple weeks later, the Biden administration started talking about vaccine mandates. Wait a minute. Why? You just said it doesn't protect against transmission. And the whole rationale, whether you agree with it or not, the whole rationale behind vaccine mandates is third-party protection. That we have to protect you from spreading this disease to other people. So, but wait a minute, if it's to protect against death or hospitalization, then that's a me thing. That's there's a vaccine for HPV. Well, HPV is a sexually transmitted disease. So no, if I want to run the risk, or I think I'm not going to be involved in the behavior that transmits that, why should I be compelled to get that? That was a big thing here in Texas because under Governor Perry, he was trying to make that part of the childhood vaccine schedule. And a bunch of parent groups said, wait a minute. No, and he got in trouble from his own base from that because that this isn't like measles or something. This is, you get this from an activity that I want to discourage my child from participating in the first place. So again, you have 1984 up there for a reason because the narrative kept changing and they just ignored, they and their corporate partners in the corporate media ignored what they had said before. And no one ever called their, no one in the corporate media ever called them on it. They were never held to account for it.
But yet all of us going back to the Facebook stuff and the government censorship, this is why it's important. Because we were censored. Yeah. Remember, we that one video is still down. I don't remember what episode that was, but
really,
yeah,
I hadn't noticed our one Rumble exclusive.
Yeah, our one Rumble exclusive is still down on YouTube, and didn't we get suspended for a week as well?
I think so.
Yeah. So yeah. And all I did in that episode,
every source was from the CDC's own website.
Yeah, I took the CDC's own numbers and I broke down the myocarditis rates in children. And that was the episode where I called it systemically racist because it affects more Black people than
disproportionately affects. Yeah.
So here's your hack to that. There are more young Black children proportionally than there are young white children because white people aren't having babies right now. So I mean, it wasn't anything to do with the actual race. It's just was the demographic data.
It was using CRT's own language against itself. Is essentially what you were doing there. Of using their own logic to as a petard upon which to hoist them. Do you think that any of these, see, this is where I'm scratching my head because I don't know, I haven't looked into these cases. So I don't know what state laws these AGs are investigating under. So do you think this will actually go anywhere?
That I don't know. It's pretty strong. I'm looking for a specific one. The last story I saw is when South Carolina got into it. I think it is. Let me pause for a second and read this article real quick, and then.
Okay.
Right, sorry for the hiccup. We had to go ahead and find that document and take bathroom breaks. Heath lost his camera in the process, so
yes, it's my daughter needed it for something. I am not pulling a Jeffrey Toobin, I assure you. But let's move on because you've got a heart out, and I
got the letter up. It's just
okay.
Yeah, so we can take our faces off and put the letter up. This is the actual document that was filed, and this is actually important because this is a very fine line. So what they're asking for is that the congressional committee keep investigating, and then if you believe that any of these violations are in violation of state law, please pass that on to us. Okay. And this is the worrisome part of it is because the old famous saying, show me the person and I'll find the crime. You know, so, but at the same time, if there are incredible crimes that have been committed, we do want those to be prosecuted on some.
Yeah. Well, my concern is, okay, see, I didn't realize this about the state AGs. This reeks of political photo op, and and politicking and campaigning and passing the buck. Oh no, see, we're doing something. Okay, so the only one who's actually done anything is DeSantis and I can't remember the AG there and the Bhattacharya. Was that the Florida health guy?
No,
Or
you're
is that
thinking
someone else?
Latipo. Latipo was,
Latipo.
yeah.
Yeah. So they're the only ones who have actually done something substantive. Unfortunately, the and we talked about it when they issued their preliminary report. They weren't able to determine that a state law had been broken. That, yeah, there were all of these shenanigans, but they don't appear to have violated any state law. Is basically what the grand jury decided. But at least they actually investigated. At least they did something tangible.
Mm-hmm.
I want to know if these AGs are doing anything besides signing a letter so that they can have a viral moment run around the internet.
Well, it's not always about prosecutions because you could get discovery.
Yeah. Well, and so this is benefit of the doubt where they would need Congress to uncover this is because even if they broke state law, these are federal agents under federal agencies. And so it is much easier for Congress to compel testimony before committees, but then also more importantly, get documents.
Mm-hmm.
The Senator Johnson of Wisconsin, who is Ron Johnson is one of the very few, maybe the only guy talking about jab injury and has been for a while. And he was on the Steve Day show last week or the week before, and 2 weeks ago now, because it was right before the Super Bowl. And he talked about this of, the Fauci pardon may have been a double-edged sword because, all right, we can't federally prosecute Fauci, but that means he can't claim Fifth Amendment protection, which means we can compel his testimony. And he said that is something his committee will do, but first they need the documents so they know what questions to ask. And he talked about how the Biden administration stonewalled and either refused to hand over documents or they gave them documents where literally everything was redacted. Literally everything.
Mm-hmm.
And he has shared this on his X account before of showing page after page after page where like every line is blacked out, which is absurd because redaction is supposed to protect individual identities. It's supposed to protect sources and methods. This is not what redaction is for. So he said right now they are waiting on, and this was before RFK was confirmed. So now with RFK as the head of HHS, it should be much easier for them to get that documentation and then move forward from there.
Well, one thing he promised in his hearings for HHS secretary was that all government health documents are going to be accessible to everybody. You don't have, you don't have to have a FOIA request to get the information we're trying to get.
Yep. If these are public agencies and public funds are generating these investigations, trials, whatever, why do I need a FOIA request?
Mm-hmm.
That's like if I needed a FOIA request to get C-SPAN footage of congressional speeches. What? No, what the hell? That's my elected representative. I should know what he's saying on the floor of the House of the People.
Yeah, I'll go even a step further. It's like a shareholder in a company needing a FOIA request on the earnings. Why should the shareholder of the company need to do that? We're all the shareholders of the company that is United States. We're their boss. They're not our boss.
All right. So did you have any more on the state AGs and what's going on with Fauci, because I want to unpack something, which is basically why this shouldn't matter.
Nope, go ahead.
Okay. So I was looking and I couldn't find, I don't think Birx ever got a pardon, was one of these last minute pardons. And interestingly, when I was looking at her Wikipedia entry, I did not know she retired as a full colonel in the Army. Recall her to active duty, bust her down to private, and court-martial her. That is entirely within the power of the president. And I don't have much reach on X, but I'm going to go on and tag anyone I can think of and say, hey, do this. Anyway, so in preparation for this, Matt Kibbe, who is a journalist, and I think he's primarily or started with economics, but now he has gotten into all sorts of things because he was one of the few voices saying on a lot of these issues the past number of years of something doesn't smell right here. What's going on? And the Blaze has been producing a series, an investigative journalism series. You know what the corporate media used to do. Speaking of 60 Minutes, this is the kind of thing 60 Minutes used to do. Unfortunately, it's behind the paywall, but I mean, they got to pay for this stuff somehow because these kinds of things aren't cheap. And so it's called The Cover Up. If you want to watch the trailers for them, are on the Blaze YouTube page, so you can get an idea of what these are about. And episode 4 just came out. And it's called The Smoking Gun, and it is specifically about Fauci. And it went into some history, some of which I had forgotten, some of which I remembered, and some of which I had never heard of. And it made my blood boil. So I'm going to very quickly go through the highlights, the notes I took on episode 4 here, and go through what was done, why it was done, how it was done. And the interviewee of episode 4 is, I don't know if you know this name, Dr. Richard E. Bright. He is board of governors. He's on the board of governors and a professor of chemistry and chemical biology at Rutgers University. Very highly regarded, has published a lot of papers, has been cited a lot. So if you want to get into the dueling experts, I feel pretty good about mine. Who's yours? Anyway, he goes all the way back and starts in the fall, winter of 2001. And I went, huh, why? Oh, I had forgotten about this. But he says this is when he first became concerned with biological and chemical security. Because remember, the anthrax mailing attacks started in October 2001. And because of the proximity, it was assumed that this was a terrorist attack from one of these overseas terrorist organizations. Hundreds of billions of dollars was allocated for biological defense because of this. And they play the clips of W in the Rose Garden at the signings talking about why they're doing this and about why this is important. Ebright's concern then, and they showed that he wrote op-eds for the New York Times and the Washington Post about this. So this isn't revisionist history on his part. It's no, they bring up the documentation showing how he had been talking about this for a long time, is that you have a massive increase in funding, which means you are increasing access to these toxins, but there is not a corresponding increase in security. And as you go down the rabbit hole of what happened here, Cheney, as vice president and kind of W's point man on defense, used the NIH and NIAID to circumvent the biological weapons treaties that the US is a party to. Why? Well, because of those treaties, there is within the Department of Defense a compliance office for those treaties. So if DARPA wants to do research into biological weapons, they have to go through this compliance office and say, does this violate the treaty? And if it does, they can't do that research. NIH and NIAID had no such office. So it came down to Fauci and Francis Collins. There was no committee. There was no office. It was just those two guys. And will you approve these grants and this funding? Yeah, sure. Totally. Fast forward and remember that in 2008, finally, the FBI got to the bottom of this. Probably. We don't know for sure because the guy who is the suspected perpetrator of those 2001, 2002 anthrax mailing attacks committed suicide when the FBI closed in on him. He was a researcher, an American researcher with a government contractor at one of these sites. That did not create any sort of reanalysis of this of, oh, wait a minute, this thing wasn't a foreign actor. Maybe we should use some of these hundreds of billions of dollars on security. The response was an increase in funding and personnel to contract sites, not security. According to Ebright, there was a 40 times increase in the number of persons who were conducting this types of research and thus had access to these toxins. And as he said, the more sites you have, the more people you have, the more chance there is of either an accidental exposure or, in the case of the anthrax attacks, a bad actor. Fauci personally contacted microbiology research to shift their focus to bioweapon strains away from public health or natural strains. And Ebright gives a couple of examples of, I don't know the witchcraft. He gave the exact strains, but the virus that causes Legionnaire's disease. Well, there are people studying that, the naturally occurring virus. And he said no, and Fauci called them and said, I will give you grant money if you shift away from studying that strain to studying this strain, which is the strain that is used in biological warfare. And this is all Ebright. The thing, my personal op-ed here is it reminded me of the FBI whistleblowers on Patrick Bet-David and Tim Pool, who were, at least one of them was involved in child exploitation investigations. And he was pulled away to do January 6 investigations. Holy crap. And then Ebright also went through a whole list of embarrassments and close calls from the 2000s to the early 2010s, which is what led to, in 2014 or 15, I don't remember when, the Obama administration issuing the pause that was talked about on gain-of-function research. And finally, in 2018, there was a new risk-benefit policy that was instituted for any project which would increase either the, I don't remember which is which. Virulence is basically the lethality, right? So any research that would increase the lethality or the transmissibility of a biological agent had to go through a risk-benefit analysis. But only 3 projects were ever reviewed under that policy. Why? Because Fauci and Collins were were responsible for forwarding projects that potentially violated this new policy to the supposedly independent committee that would then do the risk-benefit analysis. So they circumvented this policy by simply never forwarding projects, grant proposals. They just would never forward them to this committee. So nothing, there was risk-benefit analysis were never done. Okay. Now remember some things that we have uncovered recently. Between 2014 and 2018, The Intercept did FOIA requests So we now have the documentation of UNC, the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and the EcoHealth Alliance sending both grant requests and updates, because if you have a government grant, you have to provide updates for how your research is progressing in order to continue to receive funds, because you don't always get the grant as a lump sum payout. It is, here is the first part of this grant, do your research, show us what results you're getting. Okay, here's the second part of the grant, continue your research to the end of that grant time and funding, and then you reapply to continue for a new grant to continue your research.
Which is partly so they make sure that you're doing what they want you to do. But
exactly, that you're actually doing what the grant proposal said you were going to do, and that it is producing results.
Well, what I meant by that comment was that it's producing results that we like.
That too. All right. So in December of 2023, a group called US Right to Know did a FOIA request, and Ebright called this information, quote unquote, decisive as far as what COVID was, where it came from, and who is responsible for it. Because there were draft proposals and communication between those said groups, UNC, Wuhan, EcoHealth, and the heads and the researchers who were doing this. That FOIA information indicates that, one, the primary research was going to be done at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. It indicates the precise location of trigger warning witchcraft terminology incoming, the furin cleavage site. I don't know what that means. I just see cleavage and say, huh. So that's a you thing.
Yeah, it makes it easier for it to attach to ourselves.
Also, and perhaps most importantly here, it indicated the methodology that they were going to use to create that cleavage site to make it attach more easily to human cells. And according to Ebright, I'll put my dueling expert up against yours, theoretical straw man, quote, exactly match the features of SARS-CoV-2. And then when asked by Kibbe why, Ebright said, quote, the work has no civilian practical application, end quote. So why the hell was it being done?
Would you see during, all the stuff that came out of RFK's hearing, and one of them was is Lyme disease was Lyme disease a biological weapon? Now, if you ask Google Gemini, they say it's a conspiracy theory that's going around, And of course, RFK is a conspiracy theorist, but the person who wrote the book on it herself said, I can't prove that Lyme disease itself was. But here is all the other stuff we know that the government did with ticks. And it was disgusting how they were testing it by just dropping it on populations and seeing what happened.
Yikes.
And yeah, making insects a biological weapon. This makes me think of when Bill Gates said we can just put, we have a meme for this. So that might be the cover here. Putting the vaccine, the mRNA vaccine, in mosquitoes and just sending it out to the population so everybody gets vaccinated. For her,
Unit 731. I was trying to remember the exact thing. Unit 731 was a detachment of the Imperial Japanese Army that worked in Manchuria conducting biological and chemical warfare research. And by research, because I just realized you can't see my air quotes here because I'm not on camera, they were exposing the Chinese population to it to see what happened. And that they even developed a plan. So some people know about in kind of desperation, the Japanese military released weather balloons loaded with incendiaries with the thinking and hope that they would fall into the Pacific Northwest and start large-scale wildfires. And it kind of worked, but it really didn't matter. It didn't hinder our war efforts at all. But that was a test, because what they then wanted to do were they were going to take frozen fleas that were carriers of the bubonic plague and other nasty things, float them across, and then when they fell, they would thaw out. The fleas would still be alive, because and a lot of insects can do that, and then they would start spreading these pathogens. So people were tried for war crimes for that. And what you're saying, what this book is saying is, yeah, we did that too. Speaking of we did that, this was something I did not know. But one of the examples Ebright gave is that this was kind of one of the first things that started to create pushback against gain of function research that ultimately led to the pause. This is from Nature magazine, which is a ostensibly peer-reviewed scientific journal. And this was published in October of 2005. You see my headline there?
Yeah.
The 1918 flu virus is resurrected. Why? Why would you do this? And the logic, when Fauci was questioned on this, is in, no, stop, bad Zoom. Let me switch tabs. All right, did that switch tabs?
Yes.
And by, this is a new article, by Anthony Fauci, Gary Nabel, who I don't know who he is, and Francis Collins, who I do know, from December of 2011. And the headline is "A Flu Virus Risk Worth Taking." Every time he was confronted with what the heck is the purpose of this, and is the risk worth any potential benefit, he always doubled down and said, absolutely, we have to do this. Give me more money. Along with support for this research comes a responsibility to ensure that the information is used for good. Safeguarding against the potential accidental release or deliberate misuse of laboratory pathogens is imperative. End quote, from the first two sentences from this op-ed that Fauci and Collins wrote in 2011, defending what they were doing. Hold on a second. Ebright's whole point here is that you're increasing that accidental release risk by increasing the number of labs and people who are conducting this research. And whether you think it was a purposeful release by a malicious Chinese Communist Party or an accidental release because the Wuhan Institute of Virology was not a level whatever it was that it should have been to protect against accidental release, the fact is it was released. And it was released because you, in circumvention of policy that said you shouldn't be doing this, gave funding to UNC and EcoHealth Alliance and did the research overseas so you could get around this.
Well, and that research overseas specifically is what will probably protect him from state law.
Yeah, which is what leads me to my main point here. Now, this is from the Federalist website, and this is from January 22nd, 2025. What the founding fathers would have to say about Biden and Trump's presidential pardons. In 4 years, Biden used his Article 2, Section 2 powers more than 8,064 times. What does that number mean? Well, that is more pardons and clemencies issued than the last 10 presidents combined, who served over 57 years. James Wilson, the credit was Mark Muser is the author of this. James Wilson, the most prolific speaker during the debate over the United States Constitution, with more than 172 speeches and later an associate justice of the Supreme Court, called the presidential power extraordinary. In his 1791 lectures on law, he taught us that this extraordinary power was to be used, quote, after they have been apprehended, tried, and condemned, end quote. Let us be clear, Biden's family, Fauci, Milley, and the members of the House J6 committee have never been apprehended, tried, or convicted, let alone condemned. They are not eligible
Technically,
for a
his son
presidential
was
pardon.
convicted.
Exactly. That's why we talked about that, because he had a plea deal, but he had a plea deal for tax and gun crimes. And yet the pardon went back to 2014 and was blanket for anything he may or may not have done. Going back to the Federalist article here, Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution clearly states that the president has the power to pardon, quote, for offenses against the United States, end quote. Let's jump over to that real quick for the full text. Article 2, Section 2 from the constitution.congress.gov. This is Article 2 is about the executive branch. He, the president, shall have power to grant reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States, except in cases of impeachment. We'll come back to that later because that actually is important. However, back to the Federalist article, Biden understands that these individuals he has pardoned have not committed an offense against the United States because his pardon statement says, quote, the issuance of these pardons should not be mistaken as an acknowledgement that any individual engaged in any wrongdoing, nor should acceptance be misconstrued as an admission of guilt for any offense, end quote. How can former President Biden pardon someone for offense against the United States when his pardoning message says they are not guilty of any offense? While our founding fathers would have said the president could not pardon someone who has not been convicted, the Supreme Court has indicated that a president might have the power to preemptively pardon an individual. However, for someone to avail himself of this Supreme Court precedent that is not fully developed and is over 100 years old, the individual must first confess to an offense against the United States. If an individual does not confess to an offense against the United States, the court in Birx versus U.S. made clear the department is not valid.
The pardon is not valid.
Sorry, what did I say?
The department.
Herpa-derpa.
Yeah.
Back to the article. Should President Trump's DOJ decide to investigate the Biden family, Fauci, Milley, or the members of the J6 committee, these individuals could be prosecuted until they publicly confessed to an offense against the United States. However, even if they did that, Trump's DOJ could still pursue the matter, arguing that Article 2, Section 2 did not give President Biden the right to preemptively pardon anyone. That issue would eventually be heard in the Supreme Court. Only then would the nation have a definitive answer as to whether a president has the power to preemptively pardon someone who has never been convicted and who has not confessed to an offense against the United States. Pause here for editorial. There is one famous precedent for a preemptive pardon. And that was when Gerald Ford pardoned Nixon. Now, the reason I said put a pin in that point about impeachment is because a lot of people think Nixon was impeached. No. When it became clear that enough Republicans were going to side with the Democrats and that he would not only be impeached in the House, but almost certainly convicted in the Senate, he resigned. It was understood that the acceptance of that pardon was an admission of guilt. And Ford did it to say, all right, this was wrong. This was an embarrassment to the whole country, but we need to move on. Why is that important? Well, back to the article. According to Alexander Hamilton, the purpose of the pardon power is to help heal the nation after a time of turmoil. I would once again editorialize because I've got Federalist number 74 open here. which if you go to the Founders Online in the National Archives, these are all available. You can read them. And besides being ridiculously erudite and reminding us of how stupid we are, because most normal people can't understand that, if you read the full Federalist number 74, actually what he's saying is that is a purpose of the pardon power. Quoting from Federalist 74, Hamilton wrote, "In seasons of insurrection or rebellion, there are often critical moments when a well-timed offer of pardon to the insurgents or rebels may restore tranquility to the Commonwealth," end quote. George Washington understood this principle when, in 1795, he issued amnesty to those engaged in Pennsylvania's Whiskey Rebellion. President Trump is simply following the advice of Alexander Hamilton and the example of George Washington. Democrats in Washington, D.C. have called the events that transpired on January 6, 2021 an insurrection. President Trump is using the intended purpose of his pardoning power to restore the tranquility of the nation after 2 years of public political prosecutions. Why is that important? Because the people defending the Biden pardons are saying, well, Trump did the same thing because the J6 pardons are political. He is protecting people from political prosecution, and that is what Biden did, is protect people from political prosecution. The difference is, as the author of this piece cites, is in Trump's pardoning documents, back to the article quoting, President Trump issued pardons to all individuals, quote, convicted of offenses related to events that occurred at or near the United States Capitol on January 6, 2021. Jumping to Black's Law Dictionary, which is the definitive law dictionary, because basically Black was someone who took what is called British common law and condensed it into an actual tome of legal terminology and legal philosophy. Pardon, an executive action that mitigates or sets aside punishment for a crime, an act of grace from governing power which mitigates the punishment the law demands for the offense and restores the rights and privileges forfeited on account of the defense. A pardon releases offender from entire punishment prescribed for offenses and from disabilities consequent on his conviction. It reinstates his civil liberties. The power to pardon for non-federal crimes is generally invested in state governors, while the president has the power to pardon federal offenses. Distinguished from amnesty. The distinction between amnesty and pardon is one rather of philological interest than of legal importance. I would disagree with that, but moving on. This is so as to their ultimate effect, but there are incidental differences of importance. They are of different character and have different purposes. The one overlooks offense, the other remits punishment. The first is usually addressed to crimes against the sovereignty of the state, to political offenses, forgiveness being deemed more expedient for the public welfare than prosecution and punishment. The second condones infractions of the peace of the state. Amnesty is usually general, addressed to classes or even communities, a legislative act or under legislation, constitutional or statutory, the act of supreme magistrate. There may or may not be distinct acts of acceptance. If other rights are dependent upon it and asserted, there is affirmative evidence of acceptance. All right, so there's a lot of legal jargon there. But the point is, and the reason why I went back to Black is because that is someone the founders knew well and themselves often cited, meaning they damn well knew the difference between a pardon and amnesty, and they wrote pardon in the Constitution. Amnesty was used rather liberally, lowercase l, during the Reconstruction period after the Civil War for that express purpose of we need to heal the wounds. Over 600,000 of our citizens, North and South, killed each other or died during this war. We need to move on and start healing, and we can't do that if we have a bunch of trials and start hanging the insurrectionists. Enough blood has been spilled. Let's heal the nation and move on. Okay. The point being, the price was already paid and paid dearly. No one who has committed these heinous acts against us has paid a price. No one has been held accountable. The Department of Justice should absolutely challenge these pardons and open up investigations against Fauci, Collins, Birx, as I said, should, hey, you don't even need an open investigation. Recall her to active duty, bust her down to E1, and then throw her in front of a court martial.
The problem with the current environment is I don't think the federal government is going to do that, because unlike 2016 Trump, this one, he's doing a lot now, but he is also skirting around the let me not do what was anticipated of me
Yeah.
by my enemies, which is the prosecution of people that were responsible for things that happened 4 or 5 years ago. So I think he is trying to he might be wink wink nudge nudge to the AGs, to the state departments and stuff, but I think he's really trying to avoid that part so he can do all the other things with basically the news cycle not having anything to grasp onto other than, oh, he's being a dictator in cutting the government down. Yeah. So I think he's playing the game. I think he pulled the 180 on purpose.
My hope is that, I know there's a lot on the plate right now. My hope is that part of what is being done here isn't just to trim the federal budget by identifying and cutting out all this waste, fraud, and abuse, which is a phrase that's been thrown around a lot, but no one's actually done anything about it. Not just that, which is important, especially when you consider the inflationary effects of the deficit and the debt. But remember, in his first term, people freaking out about this order to get trans out of the military. He already tried that in his first term, and the generals just ignored him. So part of my hope about what this Doge effort is not just the budgetary part, but letting the chief executive actually be the chief executive rather than a figurehead who issues orders, but then our true rulers are the unelected bureaucrats who get to decide whether or not they want to follow the orders of the duly elected executive. And so my hope is that after he has become a true executive, then he can start to wield more power. Final thought, because I know you got to go. I know this has all been pretty heavy. So I'm glad, before we started, I went to go to Trigonometry's channel, and they have Konstantin Kissin's speech that he just gave a few days ago in front of the well, what's it? ARC, the Peterson's Alliance for Responsible Citizenship. He's a funny guy. He's got great timing, but it's also an inspirational speech. Hey, we can actually do this as we the people if we do it, if we have the courage of our convictions to stand up to the unelected bureaucrats and our elected so-called representatives and say, no more of this. We are going to go back to the values that we were founded upon and made us great in the first place. It is a great speech, and I highly recommend it if you need something uplifting after all this darkness, to go give it a watch.
Sounds like a good place to end. I don't have anything more positive to add, so I guess we'll do Wheel of Time on Saturday again. And
speaking of darkness, we talked about a lot about Nietzsche and nihilism last time. Well, now we're going to talk kind of the opposite side of that coin, which is Ismail's counter, which is Rand, and how he avoided the darkness.
All right, sounds good. We'll talk to you all later.